Let's get into something that I think a lot of the viewers may be interested in, and that's your own psychoactive experiences with plant medicine. Can you
Yeah,
kind of give us a recap, at least? Like, I'm sure it was part of your trip down to Peru.
yeah,
What was your experience? How do you understand that? And maybe how do you orient that in your own worldview as a doctor?
yeah. I mean, I've seen. So my first experience on ayahuasca, I basically had nothing happen. I took 3 cups. I went into a spiritual experience that I could not deny, and I went with a good group of friends, someone I really trusted. And after we did 2 cups, and then the shaman called it a night, and I was like, "Hey, I didn't feel anything," and she was like, bug-eyed, like, "You didn't feel anything?" I'm like, "Nothing." She gave me another cup, and I still didn't really feel anything. So I went outside and I was kind of atheistic, and I was like, man, I'm just a bag of meat. Like, this was supposed to be my experience to connect to God.
Right.
And yeah, I was kind of depressed. I'm like, shit, I'm just a bag of meat. I'm gonna die. I'm like, let's make, I was like, literally, like, let's make the best of this. Like, that's kind of what's gonna happen here. And literally the next morning though, like when I heard about everyone else's experience, and I had like two like minor things happen. One was that I had like a dream of like a tiger print. And then when one of the healers was singing, I imagined like I had a flashback to when I was like 4 or 5 of like a cool ocean breeze, um, cooling me off because I did the diete, which is like if you're going to do ayahuasca, they recommend like staying away from sugar, salt, sex, caffeine, all these things. And I felt like by a week of that, I felt like shit, man. Like I felt hungover, like, and then I took the medicine. It made me feel just queasy. I wasn't feeling good. And when she was singing, I felt like I had that flashback to when I was a kid, and it made me feel a little bit better for a little bit. And then the next morning, everyone went around the circle, and one of the ladies was, or one of this guy was like, hey, or he's like, he told a story about he was with a girl, they broke up, and they were engaged, they broke up, and then they were in the process of getting back together, and she died in a car accident like 3 years previously. And he's like, she came to me last night and said she loved me and it was time for me to move on. And I loved her. We connected. I felt real connection with her. It was her, and I'm ready to move on. I'm ready to go. And I was like, Jesus, that's crazy, you know. And I heard all kinds of stories like that. And when it got to me, I was kind of embarrassed. I was like, yeah, it was cool to meditate for 3 hours. But after the circle closed, I went up to the energy healer, and I didn't want to say this.
Hold on, you cut out. You cut out. You
uh,
said you went up to the energy healer
yeah,
and you didn't want to say this.
Yeah, because I was afraid of it offending the shaman. That like one of the highlights of the night was this energy healer singing to me, and I said, when you sang to me, it felt like a cool ocean breeze was just cooling me off. And she's like, oh well, that makes sense because I was singing this song of the African goddess of the ocean. And I was like, oh cool, like a little bit of synchronicity there. And I was like, that's really cool. And I like, I was like, maybe there is something to do with this. And the shaman started giggling, and I was like, and then she goes, yeah, the African goddess of the ocean works very well with the tiger mama. And I didn't say anything about like my only tiger vision thing that I had. And I go, who's the tiger mama? And she's like, that's me. That's like when I go spirit form, that's who I like become or whatever. And I'm like, what? And then basically the next couple days I had all these synchronistic things happen. And then I went back 2 weeks later, and I had the full blown like visions, and I had chakra, like all these like visions and stuff that I just literally couldn't comprehend a whole lot. But my second time, I had this. It was so weird, man. I'm the weirdest than anyone I've seen when I do these substances. I had this part where I was down on all four knees like a dog, and I had my third eye pressed to the ground, and I had this vision that I was in a coal mine and I was going down, and I went through each of my chakras. And first I went to like red, and I started like focusing on my spirituality, who I was, what I believed in. And I got to orange, and I brought up all these previous relationships that I felt like dirty with, like girls that I like, some that I liked, but their energy wasn't all that good. And I could feel all of like the negative things about each chakra that I didn't like. All the energy would go to my stomach. And I'm like, and it was like I had someone over my shoulder going like, yeah, you're gonna get rid of that, you're gonna get rid of that, you're gonna get rid of that. And then like I purged. And so there was like a physical representation of all these metaphors. And I think that there's just an overabundance amount of information in there figuring out like something with healing.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Peterson, I think, actually at one point had said that he thinks that most physical diseases are all just like a subconscious cover up for whatever, psychological issue that you're brushing under the rug.
Oh wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've heard that. I
And it's
mean,
like,
but that's
you
so.
know,
What's so interesting is that. So first, it was a vision that somebody was saying that to you, right? Or was the shaman literally over your shoulder?
I don't know, man. Like this is where
Oh,
you get into this area of like, was it something like because for me, and maybe I don't know if I'm clairvoyant or whatever I want to call it, but there's just it's like when God's talking to you. It's not to me. It's not like a voice like Michael. You
right,
need to
right,
go do these things. It's kind of like it's like that. It's like that intuitive feel, like something
right.
doesn't feel right, and it was a feeling. Like when you wake up and you remember a dream. I don't see it. I don't see the dream, but it was to me. I grab onto a feeling. I
Mm-hmm.
think Jordan Peterson's talked about that. Some people are seers and some people are feelers. Like to me, it was all a feel. Like I could just, if someone was standing over me, I could just feel the energy of them, and I could feel like as if they said those things to me, and my reaction was visceral. Does that
I
make
see.
sense?
Yeah, yeah.
And
But
so,
I was going to say it's so fascinating how you talked about there was a physical representation for like the energetic metaphor or the
yes,
energetic feelings you had with your orange chakra and the sexual relationships you had and all that stuff. I just find that so fascinating that this stuff can manifest itself in a very physical way, and the catharsis of then actually purging yourself.
yes. And it makes that's what makes perfect sense. And like I remember there's times when I'll be in the toilet and I'm on the medicine. I'm like, wow, I can feel my body releasing these things because when you look at a traumatic event, you release cortisol, right? And so cortisol has to get broken down by your body, and it's you poop it out or you pee it out, like it's metabolites. It leaves your body, so it's like you literally poop out a bad experience. You poop out good experiences. You pee out. You know what I'm saying? Like so,
Right.
literally, we don't view that. Like to me, I'm like
Right.
it blew my mind. I'm like, whoa, like part of my body, that bad experience was literally in that vomit. Like there might have been neurotransmitter hormones that I've used to remember the experience. And when I thought of that experience, a neurotransmitter like clicked in my brain, and then I like peed it out, I guess would be the best way. Like, because a lot of neurotransmitters are urinated out, they're metabolites. So, but yeah, there were so many crazy healing experiences. Same thing with sweat lodges. Like there were times I'd be in sweat lodge and people would start coughing and then they'd throw up, and then you'd come to find out that they had like, something else going on where they're, we're going through something hard. And then when they were done, it relieved or they were able to let go of stuff. So, there's something in that realm of healing that we really need to tap into. Not, people used to do that. And I don't know, this is where I'd like a little bit of your elaboration on like Jesus Christ and the mushroom thing. I mean, I don't know if you give that any merit, but just, all of these, from what I've seen, a lot of these ancient cultures had some form of ritual around a psychoactive substance. So I don't know if you give that any merit or what's your opinion on that?
Well, in terms of Jesus and the mushroom, there's not much evidence to say that he actually used a mushroom. I mean, there's Allegro's book that claiming he was a mushroom,
Yeah.
although that's been highly in question since he wrote that book, and it's come to people's attention that there was alternative motives for writing the book.
Mhm.
But it's still a very interesting book nonetheless, and
Yeah.
it's very complicated because if you don't know the languages, it's deep in philology and etymology, and if you're not familiar with some of those dead languages, obviously it's a little bit over your head, so it's difficult to dive into. But there's no question that at the time in which Christianity was being developed, there was certainly the use of visionary sacraments. I mean, Carl Ruck has a whole thing, and I've mentioned this. I'm not sure on what video on this channel, and I think on Fractal Universe, how the Mithraic cults were using Haoma, and that was
Mm.
true in Persia. But then that was also true in the Mithraic cults of Rome,
Mm.
and so I have a video on the baptistry of Parma in Italy, and there they have a figure of the transfigured Christ in front of a what appears to be an Amanita muscaria
Oh
cap
yeah, I saw that
behind it.
video. Hmm.
So, but that baptistry was on the outside has a dedication to Mithra, and in it you can see it has visionary symbols and references in it. And also, you have the Eleusinian mysteries and the use of what it appears to be LSD-like substances related to ergot, and that was brewed into some type of beverage, it's believed. And when I talked to Jerry Brown, who wrote the Psychedelic Gospels, and that podcast is on the Fractal Universe channel, we had conversations afterwards, and I was really interested on, like, where does this research go? Because I was contemplating, maybe focusing my PhD program on that. And he believed that it all went to Egypt. Of course, there's evidence of psychoactive substances in ancient Egypt.
Is it Lily of the Valley or something?
Yeah, exactly. And then if you're familiar with Christianity, and I think we actually touched on this before the podcast started, with all the mysticism coming out of the desert and Syria and Egypt, and all these mystical traditions that were really focused on the unification of yourself with God, and the focus on Jesus, God, being light, and that they would purify themselves, and then they would have prayers, they would have chants, and it was all about having visionary experiences of divine light. And I'm very fascinated with that, because I think that goes hand in hand with the typical psychedelic experience on mushrooms and LSD and stuff like that. Ayahuasca, DMT is a little bit different, although the light metaphor still plays there. It's just the experience is maybe a little bit more intense. But I also... So there's no direct evidence that Jesus ever used mushrooms. However, as a healer, it's very clear that the Christology is very shamanic in a sense, because the focus is on healing. The focus isn't on love potions. It's not. Yeah. It's not like he's doing the typical magical understandings. He's not making sigils. He's not making amulets. He's not trying to. People aren't paying him to perform some type of ritual. Rather, he's healing people. And through the ideas of sympathetic magic and correspondences and stuff, I wonder if you can heal based on, if it does have to do with vibration. And therefore, if somebody is an enlightened being, if they are an enlightened, because that's kind of what psychedelics do. It raises your vibration to this new place, that maybe if you're already there naturally, and of course this is debated between people in the psychedelic community and the spiritual communities, whether you can get to these states naturally, and given the literature in mysticism, comparative mysticism, it seems like you can, and there's a great book by Stephen Katz called Comparative Mysticism. It's a very big book, but it's one that's highly regarded in the academic community, but you see a lot of similarities. You also see differences. But it seems like you can get there to a degree. I've heard people talk about Kundalini yoga and having these visionary experiences. I've never got there naturally. But
breath work now.
Maybe it's because I've never purified myself, right? Maybe it's because I've never done the discipline it takes to get there. Because that's one of the key things about mysticism is you have to show, the idea of God. You have to show God that you're willing to get there. And to get there, you have to have discipline. So your diet, your meditation, your prayer, your all these things. And it's like, well, psychedelics allow you to get to places without the discipline. And I think that might be part of the problem in terms of its sustainability of enlightened experiences. Because if you have to do all this discipline to get there, just like, if you're given something or you work for something, if you have to work for something, you're going to cherish it a lot more. Whereas if you're just, you're given a vision and you're not really sure what to do with it, and it's like, oh, well, I can just take 5 to 10 hits of LSD, and I can just get there. Yeah. But is it the same thing? Because the lack of discipline, it's not that, and the discipline is the sacrifice to a degree.
Mm-hmm. You're supposed to value something by what you give up to get it, and there's different types of pain. In my last podcast, I talked to Dr. Morgan McDermott, and we talked about birthing, and she talked about how much of a psychedelic experience that was, because it's like it brings you to this place of like pain. I want this over. This is terrible. Like, get this thing out of me. To then like having a new entity in your arms in the next like 30 seconds. She's like, it's the most psychedelic. She's like, it takes you to the bottom of the ocean, and then all of a sudden you're in heaven. So, and that has to do with like that pain. Like, cause I actually, people tell that, like, I have a kidney stone. So, okay, naturopath, the doctor with the kidney stone, it happens. No one's perfect, but someone's like, that's going to be the same. Like, it's like the pain of birth. And I'm like, man, with birth, it's like, it's a purposeful pain. But I think you exactly hit something on the head. And I think that's why the psychedelic experience is so, psychedelic just means to reveal your psyche to yourself, right? So to me, when you're going through all these like psychotherapy, it's like, what better way to heal yourself than to first just be honest?
Exactly.
And that's the main thing I heard. Man, I had this guy, we were in the sharing circle the next day, and he's like, I have a boy. Me and his mom were married. We divorced, and I wanted to just take care of him. I wanted to give him everything he wanted. So I moved, and then I had this high-paying job, and I did all I could to support him in the best ways I could. And he goes, I saw him on the medicine, and he said, and I said, I love you, son. I just, I want to take care of you. I want to give you everything you want. And he's like, Dad, I never asked for that. I just asked for you to be a dad. And he just like started crying and was like, really what my son just wanted was for me to be there.
Go back. We froze for a second. You said he just started crying.
Yeah, the father started crying because he had this revelation is like, wow, I was off chasing money to give to my son when really what my son wanted was just for me to be there. And I just saw the intense healing, and I got to talk to him a little bit after it. And it's like, but do you know how hard that is? Like with cognitive dissonance,
right?
Like for him to like follow a path and believe he's doing the right thing, and for 20 years to do something wrong and then sit back and be like, shit, I'm doing something wrong. I mean, that's one of the big mental emotional arguments for a lot of these autoimmune diseases, that they're rooted in some type of, trauma or suppression of feelings. Or I think that almost Gabor Mate is the big, you've heard him. He's a big addictions guy, psychologist out of Canada. And I think his stat for people who get addicted, it's like 70% of those people are abused as children, And so they're just trying to cover it up. And, you get on medicine, man, like it's going to put some shit in your face. And with that comes an intense healing if you allow it. That's where it talks about, bad trips and good trips. And it will be interesting to figure out if the medical community can really start implementing these things to help with healing, because I think that it can really speed up, what would be hours and hours of psychotherapy for some people. But that's a whole nother ball game that we're going to have to, hopefully explore in the next 10 to 20 years. We'll see. Right? Isn't it? Mushrooms going to be legal?
They're trying to be in Colorado and Oregon.
Yeah. Which I don't know how I really feel about that yet too, because I'm libertarian. So, but that's an interesting weapon to an interesting tool to unleash in the streets.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, given it is a
natural.
But that's kind of the promise of this country. Yeah. I totally agree with you, because
there should be some forewarnings, but I still I'm all for people doing their thing, and I'm like, dude, it's a freaking plant,
Exactly. I've tripped with people before, and I've seen the variation between how the same substance at the same dose or even a lower dose will affect one person versus another person, and where they go with that. I mean, I don't want to get into my story necessarily. Well, I might as well. So I was with a gentleman, and he was actually a med school student, and he wanted to have a psychedelic experience. So he knew this was like my senior year of my undergraduate. And I was, at least among people at the university, they knew that I was into that stuff, and he wanted to have an experience. So I had LSD. We did that, and he took half of what I took, and we're sitting there, and we're listening to Alan Watts, because at the time, I mean, he, like, the amount that he took, I figured, like, the way that it would affect me, essentially one hit. You after an hour or so, you start to see visions. Maybe the colors start to swirl. Things, the lights are sharper, the lights are brighter, things are twinkling. And then you start to have fun. You can have revelations, essentially. I like to think of the Buddhist idea of satori, right? You have these little brief moments of enlightenment, like everything connects. Everything connects for a second. Yeah. And the problem with LSD is then you forget it, and then you're like, oh shit, what was I just thinking? And then
Yeah,
then
you're
it
like, that
happens
was
again.
great.
You're like, oh,
Yeah.
and then it goes away. And but that's also what I love. And most of the time I do it by myself.
Yeah.
I do not like to be with people. And
Mhm.
it comes from listening to a lot of Terrence McKenna and stuff. But after this experience too, I always do it by myself. But this guy, he, all of a sudden he's sitting in one of the, if you're familiar with, there's these types of chairs. They're like wicker, but they're like a big disc, and
Yep.
they sit in
Yep.
these things, and and you can just move them. Well, he was sitting in one of those, and all of a sudden he just grabs the side of the chair, and I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of just have my eyes closed, listening to Watts, and then I like open my eyes, and I see him like just grabbing this thing as hard as he can. I'm like, "You okay, man?" And he just like looks at me, and he doesn't respond. He's like looking right at me. I'm like, "You all right?" And then eventually he says, "Yeah, I think I'm all right." And I'm like, "Okay." And then I just close my eyes, and I can just feel the intensity. And I just look at him, and he's just like, his eyes are wide open. And he like gets up and walks around a few places, and then sits back down in a chair. And I'm like, "Dude, are you okay?" And he won't talk to me. Like, he's not saying anything. He sees me,
Yeah.
and I'm like moving in front of him, but he's not saying anything. And I'm tripping too. And all of a sudden he gets up like a zombie, and he just starts walking with his hands, and just hits this big flat screen, and it's on a stand. It's not up against the wall, so you can knock it over. I'm like, whoa, whoa. And I got to go and grab the television. He's just like walking, and I'm like, dude, what the hell's going on? What the fuck are you doing? And he's just kind of looking at it, and I open the door to go outside, and I kind of just kick his ass outside, and I shut it, and I'm like, oh, what is going on? Because I'm tripping too, so my mind's kind of racing.
Yeah.
And the next thing I know, he's at the door. I look, he's covered in dirt. He like ran and just started rolling in the yard. And I'm like, what is going on? And I go outside with him, like, dude, are you okay? And he starts like convulsing. It was almost like he was epileptic or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I'm
you're
like, whoa, what
no,
the fuck?
no, no,
what the
no,
fuck?
no, no,
And
no, no.
luckily I was living close. I had a neighbor at the time who was a buddy, one of my best friends.
Yeah.
And I call him. I mean, this is like at midnight. And I'm like, dude. And he doesn't answer the first time, but I called him again. And he knows I don't normally call people, very often. So the fact that I called him twice, like right in a row, late at night, he knew something was up. He answered. I was like, dude, get over here. I think this guy's dying. I think he's dying. I don't know what happened. He just took a hit of acid. I don't know what's going on. And he just runs over. And then while he's like laying there, he starts yelling at the top of his lungs, and we're outside. And I'm like, no, don't wake people up. We're in a neighborhood.
Yeah.
Like, no, stop yelling. And then he just, luckily my friend gets over, and he's entirely sober, and he was laying in bed, and he's like, dude, he's just having a trip. I've seen people have this stuff. He's actually in a different place.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? Because I've taken a strip before myself.
Yeah.
A whole strip. That's never happened to me ever.
Yeah.
I've taken
I think it's like
7-8
alcohol.
grams.
Some people will do 5 or 6 drinks and it's just lights off, man. You look at him like, wow, Patrick's gone. Like, he's rolling blank tape, we call it. It's like he's gone. And I've seen that on psychedelics too. So that's where it's really hard for me when people ask me like, hey, do you recommend that I do ayahuasca? And I'm like, if it calls to you, know the risks and the benefits. Like, you're not going to, well, I don't think anyone's died unless you take an MAO inhibitor with it. Don't do that. But just know, man, like it's something different for real. Like it reprograms you, basically it's like he was a computer and he was rebooting and he rebooted back on. You're like,
that's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
That's a great metaphor because for the next like so many hours, he was like walking into the side of the building, the house that we were at. And like, it was a concrete house. I mean, literally, it was like he was moving like in whatever realm he was in mentally.
Yeah.
He was moving in there. Like, that's all he could see. And he would like literally walk into the house and fall down. And then he would just like walk into another place. And that's why we had to go outside. But it also explains why he was like walking towards the TV with his hands up. And
did he remember any of it?
Yes, and that's the thing. It's like eventually my buddy, because he came over, he demanded some beers. So I gave him a handful of beers so he would sit there with me, and we were just shooting the shit while my other buddy, he's off in Never Never Land.
Yeah.
And eventually my buddy leaves, and the other buddy, he comes and sits next to us. And like you could like say his name and he would look at you, but he wouldn't say anything. Like he wouldn't respond. Like he would look at you. And eventually it was like 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. And he was cold and he was sitting there like this. So I went and got a hoodie. As soon as I put the hoodie over his head, he was back. It was like hypnotism.
Way. Yeah.
No, he was like, "Hey Pat, what's up?" Man, dude, why does my back hurt? You know, he's like, looks at his hands and their knuckles are kind of bloody. He's like, "Dude, what is going on?" I'm like, Brandon, is that you? And he's like, "Yeah, dude, what's going on?" And he, you know, and then I tell him what he's been doing. He couldn't believe he was walking into the house, like literally, you know, hitting his face against a brick wall. You know, not like hitting it like that, but just like walking, like not seeing the building was there. And I was like, "Dude, what was going on?" He's like, "Man," and he like throughout the night, the only thing he kept saying is, "What is life? What is life?
Dude,
what is my purpose?"
I had an experience like that.
And then I was like, "Dude, you kept saying this." He's like, "Man, that's crazy. I was being led by this angelic woman, and she was showing me all these things, and it's like I know that my destiny is to become a medical doctor." And now he's a medical doctor.
Good
and he's like, "I know what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to go heal people." And I was like, "Man, that's great. That's awesome. You know, that's awesome." But I don't think he ever took the substances again or needed to, because for him, the revelation, like all his questions were answered in this, you know, trip for 4 hours. But just to see what one hit did to my buddy, and I was on, you know, multiple hits, it's like, whoa, like this stuff, it doesn't affect everybody the same way, for sure.
Yeah.
But you were saying you had a similar experience what is life?
I had one where it was like I found myself repeating the same thing over and over again, and I was kind of outside of my body, and it was like find the feminine, find the feminine, find the feminine. It was really weird, and I sat there for like I don't know, and you know, you just like all these ideas are coming in, and I'm just like talking to myself. I'm just like, and then part of me is outside of it's like, dude, I did it. Like I went too far and I'm going to be stuck like this forever. You know, I'm like, and then the other me is like, no, you're not. We've been here before and we got out. It's all good. And I'm like, who are you? You know, it's like all these guys are just like, and then I'm like, who are you guys? You know? So it's fun.
I wonder,
it's crazy.
I have never got there. Like I've never got to a place where I was afraid I was going to get stuck. I don't know if it's because I've listened to so many Terrence McKenna stuff, or maybe I should take more, but I mean, I feel like I've taken so much where my body literally couldn't handle it. I took so many mushrooms, and but it's like I always feel like especially when they start to come on the psychedelic experience, I get giddy. I feel like a little school. It's like, oh, this is what I love. I love this feeling. Like I know I'm going to have revelation. I know I'm going to see like the world in a new way. I know that when this trip comes down, I'm going to be a different person to a degree. And I just love that. And I get excited, but I've been with another friend. It's like, you know, he broke down in tears because he had like a revelation about his relationship with his father or something, you know, and I've never had that. I have cried multiple times, but mostly because of beauty, mostly because even before I've kind of rediscovered Christianity, it's like, oh, the universe loves me, the universe, you know, all this stuff, and I start crying because I feel so I mean, that's God. That's just like a secular way to say God. And I just enjoyed it so much. I've never felt like I was, but also I've never broke through. I've smoked DMT multiple times and I've never broken through, and I smoked a lot of it. Like the people with me couldn't believe that I wasn't breaking through. And the only time that, you know, the best DMT, I've had 2 that were like really visionary. One didn't do much at all. The other one, I was in like a waiting room. All of a sudden I'm in a 50s diner with black and white checkered tile and a red leather booth, like Happy Days, with like the silver lining around the table, and it's like a red tabletop, and I'm sitting there and the wall's like a spinning galaxy, and people are just walking back and forth, and they're all in like 50s attire with like top hats, you know, or maybe like 20s attire, 1920s, 1930s. And like the waitresses, they're in like the skirts with, you know, the aprons, and they can see me. I'm looking at them. They can see me. And it's like so vivid. And it's like,
you're
whoa,
like a
they
ghost,
can see
man.
me. And then like a dude just got into the galaxy and then walk. And so just like this.
Yeah.
And that's the archetype of a time traveler. So if you like look up the way a time traveler is presented in like art, it is a man with a suitcase and a top hat and like a full suit. And that's the archetype. And that's why the Imaginary Foundation, that's where this art comes from. They use it so often. And I have multiple artworks of that gentleman. And the idea is like he's a time traveler. He's the person who always exists, right? He always moves through time. Essentially a Christ figure, although who knows what his morals are. But but it's that same idea. And then the other one, it was like it was like Candyland. It was like really soft colors, like baby blues and pinks and yellows. And it was like hills and they're just like moving around. It was like kind of marshmallowy. And both those lasted for like 5 minutes and they went away. Yeah. And I didn't see any entity. Well, I saw people, but it wasn't like the the entities McKenna talks about. It wasn't angelic figures. It wasn't any of that stuff. And I don't know. And for me, it's like, I wonder if part of it has to do with where you're at in your own journey, maybe spiritually, maybe purified, in terms of your own, like the physical chemistry of your body, or maybe I just have such a fucking big ego or strong ego. Like I can't break out of it to get to a place where it's like, I wonder if I'm ever going to return. I don't know.
Yeah, could be, man. I mean, those are all questions that, we wish we could research and figure it out, because I was like that for a couple times until I asked for too much than I could bargain for on ayahuasca. And it just, dude, I got to a point where, and I was at a really tough time in school. But I cracked, man. I remember laying on the floor and I was like looking at everyone else and I'm like, I remembered like not feeling anything, like feeling completely numb. And I said to myself, I'm like, oh, love matters. And then this voice came in, it's like, love only matters because you think it matters. And I was like, yeah, but I have my friends and my family, and like, they only, like, some people have friends and family, they don't even like them. So why does that give you like, I mean, like I went through, it was like postmodern, it was like moral subjectivism. And I started clawing, I was like grabbing, I was like, okay, love, light, purpose. And it was like, these only matter because you think they matter. And I literally just like, I felt like I fell to the bottom of hell, man. And I sat there on the floor and I looked at everyone else and I was just bitter and resentful. I'm like, these idiots all think some of this is purposeful. There's no purpose here. The vision actually started that I felt like I kicked out the outpost of heaven, like where God was like in the command center, and I kicked it open. And man, there's some representation I didn't unpack till several years later, but I kicked the door open, and I did. I felt like kind of like the elves. Like I was in this command center, and there's like these people walking around working these machines, and I'm like, who's in charge here? I got some questions to ask. and they're all like scared, and they're all like looking at me, and they're scared. And I was like, what? Who's in charge? And they're like, sir, you're in charge. And I'm like, what? I'm like, no, I'm not in charge. I'm Michael Mueller. I'm like, I'm poor little me. I'm like this little thing on earth. Like, who's in charge? I want to talk to God. And they're like, sir, remember you created the universe like a long time ago, and you're trying to figure that out. And I was like, what? No. And then that's when I went into the spiraling of like, like what matters and like love and all these different things. And then I think what I was doing was like, I went too far in my ego, like to think that I am that I like Satan. Like that's what happened to Satan. Satan's like, I run the show here. And it's like, do you want that responsibility? Like, really? Okay, you're in charge now. And then I was like, no. I'm like, it's like, I don't know what I'm doing, Right. And it sent me into this like a half an hour of like, it was not cool, man. I got out of it like all trips, and like it felt amazing for the next like couple days. But I've been there, and then on DMT too, I kind of had some places where like I broke down to the Matrix code, and then I'm like, shit. I wish I could go back. I'm like, I wish I could just go back to being like, I remember the first time I smoked and I just like shot out, and I was like fighting. I was like, no, get back in the body, get back in the body, get back in the body. I'm like, what is this? Like, did you see Doctor Strange?
Yeah, I loved that movie.
It's my favorite
a lot, Marvel.
Oh yeah, it was a lot like that first scene when he gets kicked out of the body. I was just like, what is this? Just the body, mind, and spirit of like who I am here, and it freaked me out, But it also kind of gave me some type of revelation of like what life is after death and stuff. So, yeah. Did you get all that I'll go through?
Yeah, no, I got it. You only cut out there for at the very end when you said you were talking about Doctor Strange and that explosive experience.